There we go. Hello, everybody. On today's Reintroducing the Art of Conversation, I am super excited to be chatting with someone who has not just sparked change, but has been a guiding force within the Irish social movements for a long, long time. Um, to many rooms, she doesn't need any introduction, but for the virtual world, I'm going to intro because we have other people from outside the EU and inside the EU watching. This is Ailbhe Smyth. She's a feminist. She's an LGBTQI plus activist. She is an academic. She's a force. She's so passionate and dedicated. And that those two things, passion and dedication, never wanes when it comes to her speaking up and speaking out about issues affecting marginalized communities. She's been the forefront of political campaigns here in Ireland, acting as a co-director of the Together for Yes campaign, a referendum on abortion here in Ireland. And it didn't just happen overnight. She has been the bedrock of that for years. She's a spokeswoman and convener for the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment, as I just shared there, founding member of Marriage Equality, as if one referendum wasn't enough for her to tackle and overcome. She did two. She's created and is a part of Feminist Open Forum, organizer for Action for Choice, and a board member for Equality and Rights Alliance. As if that wasn't impressive enough, her commitment led her to listing as one of Time's 100 most influential people alongside other Together for Yes co-directors. So let me just say that again. Her commitment led to her listing as one of Time's 100 most influential people. She's been nominated twice by the Minister for Education to serve on the Board of Higher Education Authority. So she mixes in a lot of great rooms that makes fundamental change. She's been an activist since the 1970s during her student years and has led to incredible waves of change within Ireland. And has undoubtedly had a knock-on effect for other countries who are currently in the midst of change. And the first country that comes to my forefront right now for their change is Poland, who's going through similar changes that we have been for years. And I'm so delighted to welcome you to the show, Ailbhe, and discuss your journey. And thank you very much for gifting us time and your brilliance.
Well, it's lovely to be here, and thank you, Maria, for asking me to chat with you today. That was an incredibly generous introduction, I must say. I actually just want to add a couple of things
Yes.
move on. I actually chair Women's Aid Ireland, which of course works with and support women who are experiencing domestic violence. And I think that's just so important at the moment that I'm really proud of the organization, very proud to be chair. And I have recently, since I've become an older person, I'm 75 now, I've recently gone on the board of Age Action Ireland, because I think we need to speak up for older people. And very, as with aging, as with everything else, gender makes a huge difference. So I think of this as a transgenerational chat, Maria, because I'm just thinking it's fantastic to have a young woman like yourself representing us over there in Brussels. And I'm really proud of you for that. I think it's fantastic. And that's you're the way forward. You really are.
Well, you're very, very kind with your words back, but I wouldn't have got to this position if it wasn't for leaders like yourself. And I mean, this is where I get off on a tangent because I have a list of questions in front of me, but then other questions are skyrocketing. But can I fangirl you for a moment and say, for anybody outside of Ireland who's watching this, I'm an LGBTQI woman. I'm also an activist and ally of the many letters that our Rainbow's community represent. And I also am pro-choice, i.e., I think a woman has every right to choose what she wishes to do with her body. And me as a 34-year-old woman who calls myself an Irish American because I was born in the States but very much raised in Ireland, and I sit in the European Parliament, I wouldn't have gotten to the places that I got to if leaders like you didn't see the change that needed to happen for women like me. Now we still have a long way to go in many ways, but we would not have gotten to this point if it wasn't for folks like you, and for two big referendums, and ultimately deciding to put my hand up post those referendums to get involved in politics. Just I can't say thank you enough.
Well, thank you. It's not that we're leaving your generation and generations of my grandchildren, we're not leaving you the world in a very good state. And I do know that there are huge challenges now facing us and huge challenges facing us ahead. I mean, I'm very, like everybody, very worried, anxious and concerned about the future of the world for my daughter, my grandchildren, and everybody's grandchildren, not just mine, I'm thinking there is so much that has to be done. We have to take a deep breath and face into
I know. Let me kick off my first question before we go down. And I think we're both optimists. I mean, you must be, because of all the change that you knew was tangible and knew was possible by working ahead. But can I take you back a little bit to when you first left Ireland? And I know Ireland has been your home for, I mean, I think anybody who was born or grew up in Ireland, the transient relationship we have with our country, wherever you are from in the country, is real. But I'd love to know, when you first left, and did living somewhere else have instrumental influence on your activism?
Yes, I think it did very, very much, because from quite an early age, in my early teens, my aim in life was to get out of Ireland. And it was quite a repressive place, but I just wanted to see what was happening elsewhere. And by great good luck, I had been taught French in school from the age of 8. And I thought, right, okay, France, I could get to France and I could go and learn French. So I pestered my parents, and in those days it was quite unusual, but I pestered my parents and I pestered the nuns in my school. And I was shipped off eventually at the age of 14 to a convent in Normandy for 6 to 8 weeks, where I wasn't, in fact, incredibly well behaved. I was a bit of a tearaway. But I discovered that I couldn't really have conversations with the nuns, who were very nice, but I mean, we weren't exactly on the same wavelength. So I went to the tourist office in Alençon in Normandy, and I said to the woman who ran the office, I said, it's very difficult. Here I am. I'm supposed to be learning French and I've nobody to talk to. So she took me onto her wing and organized all kinds of sort of meetings and social occasions, and going to her farmhouse off in the countryside and meeting her children. And goodness, it was absolutely brilliant. And I came back after my 6 weeks, and I was with a friend. We came back. I never looked back after that, Maria. And I ended up doing French and English literature at university. And my very first job, which I started when I was 21, was in the Department of French Studies in University College Dublin, where I stayed for, oh my God, 30 years. No, not 30 years. Wow. I don't know how long. That experience of France and French has been absolutely huge for me. And of course, encountering the women's movement then in France a few years later, and becoming very involved with people who themselves are, and indeed still involved. One of my dearest and greatest friends, a very important person in my life, is a wonderful French feminist called Christine Delphi, who really took me under her wing, and we have stayed close for very, very many years, and with whom I started having the most extraordinary and intriguing conversations, which we actually still have on the phone at the moment. Yes. So I would say that experience in itself, without thinking about anywhere else, has been absolutely formative in my thinking. Amazing. And my thinking also about Ireland is not just that little island out on windy ledge in the Atlantic, that we are actually part of Europe, and that it's incredibly important for us all to come together to face the challenges that we have in the world today.
I mean, but I mean, to your point of a seed just needs to get planted.
Yes.
An opportunity just needs to be gifted to a younger
Yeah.
person in order to change how they see things.
I
And
would love.
sometimes, yeah,
Well, I was going to say, I think, I'm not going to talk about Brexit really, obviously, but I think one of the big losses in Brexit is the Erasmus program for students. And I'm hoping that that can continue in some shape or form, because those opportunities, and I saw it with my own students, to spend time abroad and to have students from elsewhere, whether it's from Poland or whether it's from Italy or the Netherlands or wherever it is, that those real exchanges are social, and they are intellectual. They are about learning how all of the areas of thinking that don't have much purchase wherever you live, wherever I live, whoever, and just understanding being in the world and how we can benefit from those exchanges. And I think every young person should have that opportunity, whether they're a university student or not. I don't think everybody has to go to university. Are really, really, really important. And the other thing is they're actually fun. They're enjoyable. I'm a great believer in having some enjoyment in life as well. And that sense of exploring and investigating another culture. I mean, there's nothing like it. There's nothing to
yeah.
second it
There's
if you
there's
have the right
and you're right.
conditions.
There's nothing to compare. Absolutely, absolutely. Can I ask you a question that I feel is the worst question to ask? It's like asking a grandmother, which you've shared you
Which I
are.
am.
Who is your favorite? Which is your favorite grandchild? Like, my next question is, what issues are you passionate about, and how has that influenced your work? I feel like this is, well, I'm passionate about a lot of projects, and I can equate that to being a grandmother. I can only imagine being like, well, how do you choose which one it is? But for you, and to your point of being on the board, and talking about beautiful aging, because we are getting older, and women are living a hell of a lot longer, which is fantastic.
Yes.
But over the have you looked at passion projects, and how they've influenced your work based off your own transition, or is it a case of, are you as passionate about all the movements that you've been involved in from
Yes.
day one?
Well, I mean, I think a lot stemmed for me, and centered around, and still does center around gender and sexuality, and everything really around those connected areas, I suppose. However, I do think that our socioeconomic space and place and positioning in the world is incredibly important. So inevitably, I've also been very interested in movements and involved in movements which are fighting for better material conditions for people. So fighting against poverty in Ireland at the moment, as you well know, Maria, we have a huge problem in relation to homelessness and housing.
Yeah.
That really motivates me. I am chair of a wonderful service organisation in Ballyfermot in Dublin that provides addiction services, because, I feel that the ways in which people are exposed to addiction are appalling, but people absolutely need support. So I think what I would say to you, that while gender and sexuality are a very central constant in my life, I really, I seem to get upset and angry and passionate whenever I see injustices occurring. And, there is a great deal of injustice. Our world is predicated in many ways on unjust. That tends to get me really working. And I have to say that now, when I look back at an environment and species, and really I feel very guilty about that, and I regret it. And I am trying now to sort of pick up that piece. I think I must have the kind of temperament that if you give me an injustice and a problem, I'll say, right, what can we do to fix that? And of course, you can't go around trying to fix everything. So you do have to have some kind, and in fact we can fix very little, to tell you the truth, but you do have to have some sense of continuity in your life. And mine has always been gender and sexuality, which do stem very directly from my own experience as a woman who came out when I was in my very late 30s. And, you know, seeing that then in relation to others, whether we're talking about gay men or trans men or women or non-binary or whatever it is, and women right across the board. I have, you know, I think that when we talk now about intersectionality, it's as if we never thought about these things before. And that is simply not true. The role that class plays in positioning you as a woman is absolutely key. I think about disability, the same with age. You know, you go right, and of course, ethnicity and the degree of racism that there is in your culture, our culture, whatever. All of these are factors that you have to take into consideration. So,
Absolutely.
but I mean, my fundamental passion is that or belief really is that the world as I see it doesn't treat people fairly, doesn't treat people with justice. So from my little corner where I am, I feel it's part of my job as a human being to question that and to try to do whatever is possible with other wonderful people to make to change it. It's not about me making things better for someone. It is about changing the structures so that people can live more meaningful lives.
Just, you know, and just as you were sharing that, you know, something that I don't know gets talked about, and perhaps it's just a given in the advocate and activism space, is that belief that we are all lifelong learners. So as we develop, as we evolve, as issues arise, to your point, I mean, when you were saying that, Ailbhe, I was laughing because if you ask my team, if you dangle, it's like the shiny toy phenomenon. If you dangle like young people, mental health, like
Yes.
equality, I'm like, yes, how can I be there and what can I do to help? And they're like, no,
Yes.
no, like we're working on these things because that you know, that's what we agreed to. And I'm like, I know, but we could do it all. Where in actual fact, as you said, like you do have to, not narrow is a horrible ways to do it, but you do have to be mindful. And I think particularly as women, or as those who identify as a woman, that you do have to be,
Yes.
it just I'm only learning to be more mindful of the energy I'm exerting, because I do want to be in all places and be all things, and that's a people pleaser in me. But if I want to make incremental or some sort of change in something,
Yeah.
then to narrow it down becomes so hard, but it has to be possible. Hence the reason why we have
Yes.
great people around us. But to the point of
Well, yes,
no, go for it.
you're absolutely right. And
Ailbhe, we've lost you a
well, I was
little
going
bit.
to say that that's absolutely right.
There we go.
But sometimes people say to me, "Oh, but you spent your whole life fighting for the right to abortion," and I say, "I've spent a lot of money." Okay, okay. People say you spent your whole life, you know, fighting for reproductive rights, specifically for abortion. Um, and I say, well, I don't know about my whole life because there have always been a lot of other things going on. But it is true that sometimes you have an issue which is it's a very recalcitrant issue. There's no give in it, and some issues around sexuality as well. And I think that you have to keep on doing those things while you maybe are also doing other things. And I would certainly say that probably what people would think of me as doing most is fighting for women's reproductive rights and for sexual rights for all of us. I mean, whether we're lesbian,
Yeah.
gay, non-binary, trans, whatever we are. Um, and I think that that's actually fair enough. I think you do have to acknowledge whatever is the central element
Yeah.
in your thing. But you know, even mental health, Maria, I was very ill when I was in my 20s with anorexia nervosa and very severe depression, and spent really 6 years in and out of a psychiatric hospital. So mental health has stayed very close to my own heart and experience, and looking at what's happening more or less post-pandemic, and I say more or less advisedly, I think, that's an area that we absolutely have to put huge thinking, policy development, and we have to put resources into that. Otherwise, we are abandoning a generation of younger people who really cannot be emerging from this with a great degree of ease and equanimity. It has been a terrible time for so many people. And I do think so many people have had their childhood or their adolescence wrecked and ruined because of the pandemic. And we have to find ways of ensuring that they can carry on with their lives with a degree of stability and equanimity and hope, to have hope in their lives. Everybody needs hope. We all need that. And shelter are the really, really, really important ones. Really, really important. And I forgot, and freedom and justice and a few other things as well, actually.
I love it.
Sorry, I know you've got questions. Stop me talking.
No. Listen, I'm so infatuated with this conversation. I'm just engaging and listening so much that I'm even forgetting my own job here. So, but to your point on hope and freedom, and shelter, and I'm delighted I never had any thought that we weren't going to be on the same page about mental health and what younger people are going through. But to hear you say it certainly re-echoes the work my team and I are doing. But can I ask you specifically then about, we see what's going on worldwide, and I bring in particularly your work on, women's rights and the women's right to choose, and the harsh abortion ban we see in Texas. We just had a non-legislative report passed through the Parliament last week around specifically looking at the rollbacks of change in Texas, or perhaps the awareness that has always been bubbling in Texas and it just came to the fore. But how do you think Ireland has fared in comparison? And ultimately, then, what can we do to help?
Well, I mean, I do think...
I was just going to add to that. Like, I sit in a group who is centre right. I am centre left, in terms of my liberal and my beliefs of everybody, regardless of who you are and where you're coming from, deserves full equality. And and for me, I often have these sometimes intense debates with colleagues from right across the House of the Parliament. When we talk about women's right to choose, it's, well, the way it spins sometimes, it's we are protecting the child, and absolutely, I think every child needs protection in those supports. However, when we talk about being pro-life, there's a number of steps in my eyes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ailbhe. Like, if we're pro-life, then you want to tackle poverty. Yes. We have about 14 million children living with poverty in Europe right now. Yes. You want to talk about the rise of pornography and the impact it has on intimate relationships. You want to talk about consent and what that means. And you want to talk about adequate, age-appropriate sexual reproduction education long before we talk about abortion, in my eyes.
Absolutely.
But with that, then, with Texas, and I have another question later on around Poland, but like, what do you feel, how do we feel we're in comparison, and essentially what can we do to help?
Well, first of all, I think that, the right to choose, the right to fundamentally be able to access abortion if that's what you need. And I think we do also need to name that, because we should stop sort of silencing and stigmatizing it. It is a reality in the lives of, millions and millions of women globally. And also indeed of trans men who can conceive. So, I think it's really important for us to face that reality, to be very honest about it. And basically that was what we tried to do in our campaign in Ireland, and to say, we're not here to arbitrate between good and evil. We're not here to fight about, angels dancing on the head of a pin or something. What we're here to do is to say, let's actually look at what it is that people need. What do women need? And there are times when women do need and want abortion. And that is a valid and a legitimate need. And what we need to be able to do is to provide the care and to provide the proper health procedures that will help women. And I do believe that bodily integrity, the right to make decisions about your own body, whatever your gender, if you have a gender or none, that should be a central right. So there is a very big part of me that feels that some of our problems in relation to abortion would disappear if we were able to inscribe the right to bodily integrity in our international human rights conventions, and also, of course, in our country conventions. But in the meantime, abortion is contested, and it is being increasingly contested in Europe. It's not an easy journey, even in Germany, for example. I mean, Poland, that is heartbreaking because they had it and now they don't. And that's also an important lesson, that you can gain rights and they can be removed from you. And I think in Ireland, we have to also bear that in mind. We have recently gained a right, but we have to work to keep that, to retain that right, and also to make sure that services are available. But I do think that the time has come for us in Europe, in the European Union specifically, to look at those human rights areas and to say, to what extent do we actually need Europe-wide directives, EU directives, which inscribe those rights and which have legislative frameworks and requirements which follow on from them. And that is certainly to do with bodily integrity. And I feel very, very strongly, and I know it's on foot of a really excellent report into the Parliament, at the European Parliament last month. We also need to look at European directives on gender-based violence, which of course is absolutely horrendous. And these are areas which have, I remember going way back, to the late 60s, Maria, saying, well, what about us as women in the European Union? I'm all up for it. I can see it makes a lot of sense, but our needs just simply don't feature here because it was fundamentally an economic union. It was the European Economic Community. And since then, it has grown, it has evolved, it has become more diverse and amorphous, if you like, but it also now needs to center on what are the areas where there should be Europe-wide legislation so that countries like Poland can't just make these absolutely arbitrary decisions to completely reinvent their court system and to, make political appointments in their judiciary and then to say, well, sorry, we just don't believe there should be any access to abortion, and to have huge threats to LGBTIQ people in Hungary, for example, and to have other countries looking at this and saying, they can do that, so can we. And I think we have to take that pressure off. But we might ask ourselves, why is there such pressure around and such a reluctance to do anything about bodies? I mean, you don't have workers in the community unless you have the bodies. And I do think that our gendered bodies, particularly our bodies as women, are definitely the target of these control mechanisms. And I see, as I say, great work being done in the Parliament. The thing is, and the Parliament, you are the elected representatives, that has to break through to the Commission. And don't even get me started on that, because I do think that so much more can be done. I don't think that the Polish situation, I think that should never have been able to arise in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's very shocking that it can. I know from having gone through endless argument and struggle and difficulties in Ireland in relation to abortion and the European Union, where we were longing for anything that would actually help us on our way, and it just simply wasn't to be had. In the end, we did get some help from the European courts, but that was the European Human Rights Court, the European Court of Human Rights. So, it is time for us now to be looking at that. And I think there are tremendous people in Parliament now, certainly left, centre right, who can actually form coalitions to come together on certain issues and say, we have to tackle these. We absolutely have to tackle these. And I would add to that, people who are pushed into migration for all kinds of different reasons. They're also embodied. They have bodies, and those bodies are not faring well in our European Union. I would just absolutely love to be given some very sharp kind of wand or something and to be waving it at the Commission in particular, because I think mostly the Parliament gets it, and to be waving it and saying you're not doing your job of looking after human beings. And that fundamentally is what it's about. Have human beings got what they need to flourish? And the answer is no. And gendered human beings, which is what we still are mostly in the world, women actually need full reproductive rights and reproductive care. No point in having the right if you can't actually access the care. Migrants in various countries do have some rights, but they can't access the services, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And to the point of, in terms of the power of the Commission, ourselves in the Parliament, and our council members, which for anybody connecting and watching this, there are our ministers, there are leaders like here, Taoiseach Micheál Martin, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, and the slew of ministers that we have. But since 2008, we have had an anti-discrimination directive blocked in council. And that's since 2008, which is the bedrock of all things celebrating and protecting the fundamental rights that you just shared. So your gender, your orientation, your mother tongue, your skin color, and that has been blocked by several countries. So when we talk about how to build on that, well, that is a fundamental piece that needs to shift. And the likes of, my next question was going to be around momentum, and how have you kept it going for so long? Because we joined, Ireland joined in 1973 the European Union, and because of our joining, one of the conditions of us joining was to remove the marriage bar. And 1973 wasn't that far long ago. But right now, I'm working on with other representatives again across the political house around a pay transparency file, to bridge that 14% pay gap that some countries have and other countries don't have. But like, how do you keep that momentum up? Because for me, there's days where I'm like, wow, like did I do anything to move the parameter just, or like the stick just a little bit more, or am I making it harder for generations coming up? But for you, that momentum has been ongoing for years.
Well, it's been very, very difficult. I mean, there have been a lot of setbacks. And I would also want to say that just thinking about reproductive rights, we're absolutely yet in Ireland. I mean, we are looking now at the current law, which is up for review on abortion, and it's not serving the needs of all the women who need to access services. So you are constantly working on things. I think, the blunt answer to your question is, how do you keep momentum going? I think that it's really important to have fundamentally an analysis of how societies work, and you sort of keep holding on to that and saying, okay, I can't do very much. On the other hand, if I and everybody else like me said I can do nothing, then nothing would ever change. I mean, there is part of me that's very pragmatic. I love the big idea, revolutionize the world, of course, and that's what makes me feel passionate. But I recognize absolutely on an everyday basis that you're dealing with concrete situations which require negotiation, and that you have to keep pushing. The point is, if you keep pushing in roughly the same direction all the time, you are bound to move something. You are just bound to move something. And if you keep pushing with other people, you have an even bigger possibility. I mean, for example, in 1973, ironically, I was actually caught by that marriage ban. I had just got married. I was married, one of the briefest marriages in Ireland. I was married for 6 months. But during that 6-month period, I was told by my employer, UCD, that I would have to start working part-time because of the marriage ban. So I said, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm certainly not going to start working part-time. Unfortunately, the judgment saved me, and I didn't have to ever work part-time. Although then I ran into another problem because we didn't get divorce legislation in Ireland for another 23 years. So I was technically a married woman and had a child by somebody else, and all sorts of things were going on. But during all of that time, I suppose you learn that you shift something and it displaces something else. And you just keep to stand still and do nothing is, for me, that's kind of unforgivable. If you have the resources and the capacity, if you are in a position where you can actually act to change for good, and of course my idea of good will differ from somebody else's, but all the same, I think you sort of have to do that. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to be an activist, not at all, because I think we change the world in many different ways. Thinkers, writers, artists, so important in helping and framing and enriching and nourishing our capacity to imagine the world differently. There are many, many ways in which we can change, but you have to keep the faith with yourself that your tiny little piece, Maria, it absolutely matters. Of course it matters. Of course it does. I worry when I hear people saying, oh, but I've got into Dáil Éireann, or I've got into the European Parliament, or I've become president of wherever, and I realize I can do nothing. Wrong. You can do more than somebody who's not in the European Parliament. I'm not in Dáil Éireann, but I lead campaigns, or I do campaigns. So of course I can do more. Then I can encourage other people to get cracking and to do something. I think that's pretty important. And I'm so impressed, by the way, young people really want to get cracking. They're out there doing it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have 100% thrown my questions out the window because and I'm really conscious we're 100% moving and infringing on your Friday when we're recording this. So I just one final question, and just because you opened up so beautifully there, that piece of advice, Ailbhe, after years of making monumental change in this country, that piece of advice for younger people who on days feel that nothing is moving fast enough. To your point, our political ship moves a hell of a lot slower than society, and that is a fundamental problem, and we need to speed it up. But for those younger people that are scratching their heads sometimes going, I don't understand why it's so slow. Can you part us with some of your wisdoms for the final question?
Well, what I can say is that what I see, and who I come across young people, I'm very lucky really in that way, who don't have that view, who say we have to do something. The young people out there, protesting on the Fridays, for example, they're giving us a lead. They're actually reminding us that what my generation and others have done to the world is something that we absolutely have to take action on. The other day, just a couple of weeks ago, I was working with a young group of young school students called ISU, Irish School Students Union, I think they are. And they're fighting for the right to the vote at the age of 16. And I absolutely support them in that. And they are so clued in, they're so aware, they're so determined. They're absolutely wonderful, and they will get there. They will get to having the vote. They want to set up a coalition to do that. So they're saying to me, basically, how can you set up a coalition in a week? And I say, well, you can't actually do that. But how do I know? Maybe you can. The fact that I can't do something doesn't mean you can't. So I'm very, very, very impressed. I think that there's enormous amount of awareness, and I think on the whole, young people get a pretty bad press, and it's really quite wrong, because all of the young people I meet and see, and my own nieces and nephews, and the friends of my daughter and all of that, I think they're incredible. They have so many challenges to face of all kinds, economic, housing, everything. And yet they're out there saying, we have to do better. We want to do better. We want to end racism in Ireland, for example, because there is a lot of racism there.
Yeah.
We want to ensure that people who have disabilities are, properly respected and not just kind of patted on the head. So I think I have faith in young people. I absolutely do. And I learn an awful lot from them because their means of communication are so absolutely fascinating. And they're so fast, they move so quickly. I sort of think, yes, maybe things have moved slowly, but these young people are really in a hurry and they have the communication means to move quickly, which my generation never did. We had to Xerox everything, and it was pain. We had Gestetner machines, things that you wouldn't even have heard of, to get something out there in the world. Whereas now it is much more instant. Has its problems. Regulate all those big corporates. I won't even bother mentioning their names. They need to be regulated. But at the same time, the technology is absolutely there. And they also have much more confidence. Education is better.
Yeah.
They can travel more post-pandemic, we hope. So definitely, I put my faith in younger people, and I will never, ever, ever, ever give up the right as an older person to raise my voice. I will not be pushed back. And people say to me, well, are you not thinking of retiring? Retiring from what? You don't retire from wanting to change the world, do you?
Yeah.
As long
No.
as it's not changed, we can go on.
For sure. And on that note, I'm so conscious we have held you now for over 41 minutes, and I cannot stress how enlightening this conversation has been for me personally, and I've no doubt for everybody watching. And just again, from a personal capacity, from a professional capacity, and from a very privileged position that I find myself in, I'm sucking in all that energy that you consistently deliver on every medium and for every issue, and injecting it into my work. And so grateful for everything that you've done.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It really has been a very, very enjoyable conversation, Maria, and very good luck. And know that what you do really does matter. It really does count. You really do make a difference.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Cheers, Ailbhe. I'm so grateful for you.